Welcome to Dpen Crimes. This is episode 2, and I'm Palla. As always, if you like what you're hearing and want to stay updated, follow us here on Spotify and leave your comments below the episodes. In the last episode, we started discussing the murder of Meredith Kercher. We left off with Rudy Guede's capture and his explanation. Let's quickly recap, because it's crucial to start this episode and it's really interesting. Let's talk about Rudy Guede. Rudy says, "I was there." He claims that Meredith invited him and they engaged in some petting. Although he doesn't confirm this in a later statement, there's little doubt about it. Rudy says he had eaten a kebab and had to go to the bathroom due to stomach problems. While he's in the bathroom, he hears someone enter the house. Note that he doesn't say Amanda Knox or Raffaele Sollecito entered, he says someone, because initially he doesn't specify who it is. This is one of the reasons why he wasn't believed at first. The judges didn't believe him because he kept changing his story. The core of the story remained the same, but the details varied, which made the judges think he was being insincere. It seemed like he was making it up as he went along. Rudy says someone entered, and it could be anyone. Remember, he's talking to Giacomo, his best friend, during a phone interception. But Rudy doesn't know that Giacomo is at the Carabinieri station. Giacomo is obviously trying to get him to talk, not to confess, but to better understand the situation. He asks, "But who entered?" Rudy responds, "I don't know, someone entered." Rudy was in the bathroom with headphones on, listening to music, so he didn't realize what was happening until he heard a devastating scream. He quickly put on his pants and didn't flush the toilet, an important detail because his excrement was found there later. Rudy runs to the hallway and sees someone in front of Meredith's room. Here's where it gets strange. Rudy doesn't recognize this person and can't give a precise description, which the judges don't understand. He only says the person was wearing a Napa Pidgey jacket, because he remembers that detail, and had a hat and was brown-haired. The person quickly turned around, surprised to see someone else in the house, holding what seemed to be a very thin knife in their hand. In interviews with Franca Leosini and other interrogations, Rudy describes the weapon as a kind of scalpel with a very thin blade. According to him, the killer approached and slightly cut his hand with this knife, attacking him, in quotes, and made some cuts on his hand. In fact, when arrested, Rudy had cuts on his hand. Then Rudy falls back and sees 2 people running. At first, in the initial Skype call transcript, he talks about 1 person. Later, he mentions 2 people. Then he says it's a man and a woman when everyone already knew about Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito. And that's how they end up being the 2 in his story, which lacks coherence. After that, Rudy tries to help Meredith but can't save her. Afraid of being considered the sole culprit and getting arrested, he decides to flee. He hides in Germany, where he is eventually arrested. Back in Perugia, the investigators, mainly Giuliano Mignini, already have an idea of what might have happened. Who is Giuliano Mignini? He's the prosecutor in charge of the case, famous from the many documentaries about this topic. You've probably seen many of his interviews. Mignini starts imagining a possible reconstruction of the events. Mignini's reconstruction, which we'll see in more detail, has many problems. In summary, here's how he sees it. According to Mignini, Amanda Knox, Raffaele Sollecito, and Rudy Guede agreed to go to Amanda's house, which is Meredith Kercher's house. They start smoking marijuana and drinking. At some point, Rudy goes to the bathroom, while Amanda and Raffaele start having sex. Rudy comes out of the bathroom, sees the heated situation, and, excited, approaches Meredith, who is alone, and tries to have an encounter. Things go wrong, but then, with Amanda and Raffaele's help, he rapes her. The situation escalates, a more severe stab wound occurs, and Meredith dies. However, in my opinion, this reconstruction presents not 1, but 1,000 problems. But let's go slowly and move to the moment right after Raffaele Sollecito and Amanda Knox's arrest. Remember, both were arrested after changing their testimonies multiple times about that night. Amanda had also accused Patrick Lumumba, who turned out to be completely uninvolved. Amanda and Raffaele are detained. She self-incriminated, placing herself at the crime scene, only to later retract. However, that confession is still valid at that moment, and the police go to Raffaele's house to confiscate the knives. They immediately notice there's no blood in the pipes, but there is a lot of bleach. They find 2 freshly bought bottles of bleach, and we'll come back to this later. During the search, the police also find 2 knives, a bread knife and another quite large knife. Both are analysed. On the handle of one of the knives, they find Amanda Knox's DNA, which could simply mean she cut bread since she spent many hours in that house. However, on the blade of the knife, they find a small sample of Meredith Kercher's DNA. At this point, the arrests become inevitable, and according to Giuliano Mignini and the Perugia police, the case is practically closed. However, as we'll see, there are still many details that don't add up and make this reconstruction problematic. According to the investigators, the reconstruction works because we have several key elements: a murder weapon, 3 people involved, and very clear biological evidence left by Rudy Guede, such as blood, footprints, and feces. So, Rudy was definitely there. Additionally, there's Amanda Knox, the roommate who had access to the house and who confessed to being present at the crime scene, and Raffaele Sollecito, who has a knife identified as the murder weapon in his house. We have many elements, but a solid motive is missing. The hypothesis of an erotic game gone wrong is not very convincing. Despite the lack of a clear motive, investigators believe that eventually someone would have confessed. In similar situations, with 3 or 4 people involved, in the famous gangs, usually, someone breaks at some point, especially when they realize they're facing life imprisonment. This belief is based on the idea that when a member of a criminal group realizes they have nothing more to lose, they tend to confess, even just to try to save themselves somehow. However, there are still many details to examine and problems to solve to have a truly coherent and definitive reconstruction of the events. Now let's take a small break from this case, which became the most important and discussed by the media in the history of the Italian Republic. This is partly due to the different nationalities involved. The victim was British, Amanda Knox is American, and Rudy Guede is of Ivorian origin, but lived in Italy. The case attracted attention not only in Italy, but also in the United States and England. The Perugia police, after 1 or 2 weeks, thought they had solved a complicated case by identifying the culprits. However, the media coverage had a devastating effect on the entire process. The media portrayed the protagonists, especially Amanda Knox, extremely negatively. Amanda Knox received much more media attention than Raffaele Sollecito, who is now paying the consequences of this and remained relatively less famous, so to speak. His 2 books didn't have much success. Practically no one bought them, not even me. On the other hand, Rudy Guede, apart from a famous, very good interview with Franca Leosini, has largely remained in the shadows. Meanwhile, everything has been said about Amanda Knox. We know how many people she has been with, and the media have constructed an image of her as a somewhat cursed woman, obsessed with sex and strange things, and of Raffaele Sollecito as a geek passionate about knives. In this context, the media narrative had a huge impact on the case, distorting public perception and influencing the judicial process. This is a crucial point to consider when analysing the evidence and testimonies related to the murder of Meredith Kercher. However, this reconstruction, following Giuliano Mignini and the judiciary's line, has many flaws, in my opinion, and we'll analyse them together now. Firstly, there's no evidence that Amanda Knox, Raffaele Sollecito, and Rudy Guede were friends or in contact, at least according to what I could find. And I repeat, there's everything about this case on the internet. You could spend a year reading everything available: books, videos, documents, articles. There's a lot of material, but I found no evidence, so I imagine it doesn't exist, of a prior friendship or contact between them. What we know for sure is that Rudy Guede and Amanda Knox knew each other by sight and greeted each other because she worked in a pub in Perugia, and he had been there a couple of times. both have said they met there. Amanda is from Seattle, and it seems that's the only connection between them, as he had a friend in Seattle. They tried to see each other a few times, even below the apartment where the murder occurred. The Marchigiani boys lived downstairs, and one night they met there. Rudy stayed the night, and they smoked a lot of marijuana. But they didn't have a close relationship. It's important to remember that this was 2007, so while mobile phones existed, they weren't the smartphones we have today. There's no evidence to suggest they were acquainted enough to even contemplate a sexual assault, let alone a homicide. There wasn't that kind of relationship between Amanda and Rudy, who, I repeat, didn't know each other well enough for her to invite him over to introduce him to her friend. They weren't that familiar. Imagining that three people like Amanda, Raffaele Sollecito, and Rudy Guede would become accomplices is hard to believe. Oh, and let's not forget, Raffaele Sollecito and Rudy Guede had probably never interacted before. They frequented different places, had completely different friends. Sollecito spent a lot of time at home. There's no evidence they knew each other well enough to plan something as serious as a homicide, and both say they had never met before the case. It's true that those 5 days were incredible for Raffaele Sollecito. He wasn't a Casanova. He had dated other girls, but not that many. Those days with Amanda Knox were probably the best of his life up to that point. But they had only known each other for 5 days. It wasn't a long or deep relationship, but something just starting. So we have to imagine this scene. There's an individual accused of being a drug dealer, although he's never actually been convicted of dealing. It's true that Rudy has been arrested once, but not for dealing. He was involved in a case of breaking and entering or illegal entry. I can't remember the specific details, but nothing that directly linked him to drug trafficking. There's no concrete evidence that he sold marijuana in Perugia. This is more of a construction of the collective imagination than a reality confirmed by the facts. Guys, get ready, because the judge's theory is more tangled than a drama series. Imagine this scene. 2 lovebirds, a couple where she wears the pants, and he, Raffaele Sollecito, is her faithful follower. They convince a marijuana dealer to pay them a visit, promising him a roommate to use as he pleases. It sounds like the script for a Tarantino movie, right? But watch out. This is where the real problems start. The situation goes from a sexual game to a tragedy, with a homicide in the middle. And then they have to clean up. But not only that, they also have to fix the crime scene. After the murder, the room is tidied up. As we discussed yesterday, it's staged. But this reconstruction has too many holes to be believable. Personally, I've never believed it, and I see it as very far from reality. First of all, I don't understand why only Rudy escapes and not Amanda and Raffaele. Rudy stays while the others run away. It's also not clear why Rudy goes to Germany and the other 2 stay. Additionally, it's not explained why there are only traces of Rudy in the room and not of Amanda and Raffaele. In Filomena Romanelli's room, where the scene is supposed to have been set up, things are even stranger. It's unclear why there are no traces of Rudy, but there are elements that are out of place. It's incomprehensible why Rudy didn't clean up the blood or flush the toilet. All these inconsistencies call into question the reconstruction presented by the investigators and raise many questions about what really happened that night. So, it's clear to me that something unexpected happened. But this reconstruction, which is the only one that was confirmed in court, leads to a life sentence in the first instance for all 3. What does that mean? It means that Rudy Guede's lawyer made a very clever decision by separating his case from the other 2. Basically, he argued that if Rudy was tried alongside Amanda Knox and Meredith Kercher, who at that time didn't seem guilty, but under that light seemed more than guilty, there would be a high probability that he would be sentenced to life imprisonment like them. So, what did he do? He opted for an abbreviated trial and decided to detach himself from the main case. Thus, Rudy Guede was convicted of complicity in the homicide and received a sentence of 16 years. Although he was found guilty of participating in the murder along with Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito, his sentence was much lighter than that of his companions, who received life imprisonment. The problem is that then something happens that changes. When I say the landscape changed, I mean there was a significant transformation in Amanda Knox's public image. She hired one of the biggest and most famous public relations firms in the United States. I can't recall the exact name, but it doesn't really matter. This led to a radical shift in the media attention she received. The same media outlets, especially the American ones that initially covered the case marginally, now started to focus on her, reconsidering and, in some cases, confirming her innocence. This triggered a process of sanctifying Amanda Knox with a widespread media campaign in her favour. At the same time, both Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito filed an appeal. Sure, here's the revised and more informal translation. In the appeal, a new detail emerged. They found Raffaele Sollecito's fingerprint on a bra clasp. Plus, they conducted more tests on the knife. But we'll discuss these details in the next episode because they're complex issues that need a deeper analysis. So, at this point in the story, we're at a stage of significant changes, with more media attention on Amanda Knox and the start of new legal proceedings that will continue to shape the story. But I don't want to bore you with the legal processes. They're very long. They acquitted them, then accused them again. It's very long and quite boring. The point is that the evidence is pretty scarce. I mean, we know for sure that Rudy Guede was there, and he never changes his story. He just changes the protagonists a bit. At first it was just one person, then that person was a woman. Then that woman was definitely Amanda Knox. Then maybe it was Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito. Rudy gets confused. We'll do a summary to clarify the situation. Amanda Knox was sentenced to 26 years in prison, Raffaele Sollecito to 25 years, and Rudy Guede to 30 years, later reduced to 16 years in a separate trial. They were found guilty and the case was closed, although they appealed the sentence. Tomorrow, we'll see the result of the appeal. Now let's see why Amanda and Raffaele were convicted. They were convicted on very vague and mainly circumstantial evidence, which doesn't necessarily mean they're innocent. Investigators found some of Amanda and Raffaele's behaviour strange. While forensic police were examining the body, they were outside kissing. They told the postal police that they had already called the Carabinieri, the Italian police force, but they hadn't actually done so. There's some strange behaviour. Their stories don't match, neither in terms of timing nor what they were doing. One says they watched a movie, the other says they watched it 3 hours before or after. There were problems with their stories, and that's why they started being investigated. Until Amanda's confession. Her confession is crucial. I really want to clarify this point, because there's been a lot of debate about it. It was said to have been made at dawn, but it was actually between 11:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. Some sites have written that the confession lasted 12 or even 16 hours, but it actually lasted only 2 hours. There was an interpreter, and she confirms it. But she confesses to being at the crime scene, although she says she was dreaming, that she was reliving a dream she had had. It's strange, isn't it? In her dream, she talks about Patrick Lumumba, and Rudy Guede says, curiously, she mentions a person of colour, because, yes, she saw a person of colour, and that person reminded her of Patrick Lumumba. But that person of colour was me. How is it that in a supposed dream she talks about a person of colour? Because according to Rudy Guede, she had seen me. So there's something that doesn't fit there. Something's missing. Let's talk about their alibis. Raffaele Sollecito changed his alibi 5 times. At first, he said they were at his house watching the movie Amélie. Amanda had received a message saying she didn't have to go to work, so they stayed home all night and got up at 10:30. But then, on November 5th, when Knox confesses, Raffaele completely changes his story. He says Amanda wasn't there. Here's what he said. Amanda and I returned around 6. We stayed home until 9. Then I went back to my house and Amanda went to a bar to meet friends. I went home, rolled a joint and had dinner, but I don't remember what time. At 11, my father called and Amanda hadn't returned yet. Also, it is believed that the murder occurred between 10 and 11. At 11, my father called. Amanda hadn't returned yet. I spent another 2 hours on the computer until Amanda came back at 6 in the morning. So Amanda no longer has an alibi. This puzzles the investigators because Amanda no longer has an alibi. And besides, this alibi doesn't work for Raffaele either. He bases his entire alibi on the use of the computer. But in reality, let me tell you everything precisely. Raffaele started watching Amélie at 6:27 and 15 seconds in the afternoon, and the movie ended at 9:10 and 32 seconds. But during those 3 hours, there was no activity on the computer. Well, let's clarify this computer story a bit. I'm not an engineer or a computer scientist, but from what I've read, researched, and studied, the fact that there were no operations on the computer that required human intervention means that Raffaele started a movie to create an alibi. At least, that's what the investigators say. The movie started, but it doesn't necessarily mean they were actually watching it. Then there's another interesting thing. He says he went to bed at 1, first alone and then with Amanda, and that he woke up at 10. But in reality, it is observed that at 5:32 in the morning, there was an attempt to open an audio file in VLC, which didn't work, and VLC closed twice. Then, someone, presumably Raffaele since it's his computer, started the same file in iTunes, which lasts half an hour. At that moment, the file was listened to completely, so from 5:30 to 6 in the morning, there was activity on the computer. He says that at that time he was sleeping. Well, but you understand that it doesn't make sense. First he says he was there, then he says he wasn't. Third alibi of Sollecito. Let's summarize all the alibis. First alibi. Amanda and I were at home all the time. We watched Amélie, we showered, we had sex, we went to sleep, and we woke up at 10:30. Second version. We returned to Amanda's house at 6. Then she went to a bar with some friends. I went to my house and she returned at 1. So there's a gap of 5 to 6 hours. The computer story applies to all 3 alibis because he always says he spent the night on the computer. Third alibi. During the preliminary hearing he says, I don't remember if Amanda was with me or not. And here the investigators say, but how can you not? It was the night before such a significant event that changed your life. And he says, no, I had smoked weed with Amanda before. I don't remember if she was there or not. So we see that Raffaele changes his version continuously. First he says he was definitely with Amanda, then that Amanda wasn't there, then that he doesn't remember. There's a version 3.1, as one site calls it, where he says he doesn't remember everything well because he had smoked, but the substance remains the same. Then there's version 4 of 2011. At that time, magically, years later, he goes back to the first version and says, I'm sure Amanda was with me. This happens years later. And then there's a 5th version, which we'll see in the next episode. So, as you can see, Raffaele changes constantly, and there's never any certainty. Amanda, on the other hand, always says, I was with Raffaele. At first, their versions coincide. The absurd thing is this. At first, their versions coincide, although not perfectly. That's why they called them back on November 5th. The investigators wanted to fine-tune details because there were small discrepancies. The computers and everything else hadn't been analysed yet, but there were small discrepancies. So they decided to question them again, and that's when chaos broke out. Raffaele says, no, she wasn't there. Amanda says, look, I was with Lumumba. The investigators, rightly so, also think that everything was made up and that they were with Rudy Guede, agreeing to do this. But in reality, it's more complicated than that. In fact, I'll leave you with this gem, as there are 5 minutes left until the end. I'll spend the last 5 minutes talking about something. Many people on the internet talk about Rudy Guede as the soul killer. His footprints are everywhere, and he had the opportunity to get rid of the murder weapon. We know he was in that house. But as I said yesterday, the likelihood of him acting alone is very low. The wounds don't match. Several knives were used, and it seems that one of the 2 deep cuts on the neck was made with the right hand and the other with the left. But Rudy Guede is not ambidextrous, so it's practically impossible that he acted alone. The question is, why didn't Rudy immediately say who it was? In his mind, it might be, I wasn't sure it was Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito. But this explanation doesn't hold up much. If you want to save yourself, you should say it immediately. Okay, tomorrow we will briefly analyze what comes out of the other trials and then start exploring all the possibilities. If you search for books about the case on Amazon, there are some, but almost all are sold out. There's one that I tried to buy, but never could. I only read the free part because they don't even sell the ebook. The book is only in English and is called something like Rudy Guede, The Only True Killer, How He Did It. And it explains how he would have killed Meredith Kercher. This book is interesting because the author is under contract with the advertising agency that had Amanda Knox as a client. This agency commissioned the book to support the possibility that only Rudy Guede was responsible. To this day, Raffaele Sollecito and Amanda Knox maintain that it was only Guede. They say he entered the house through the window, although that's not possible because, as I said yesterday, the clothes were underneath, and he couldn't have entered that way. But we'll talk about that not tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow. Their version is that Guede entered, like a lizard, as Leocini says, through the window, found Meredith, raped and killed her, didn't steal anything, defecated, and left. This is the version of Amanda Knox, her lawyers, and Raffaele Sollecito. It's a version that we are going to question. Answering another question. I don't understand why the prosecutor said it could have been a sexual game involving 3 people. There were signs of sexual violence. Therefore, it's assumed there was a rape. Also, in the social profiles of that time, on MySpace, Raffaele Sollecito and Amanda Knox had images referencing rapes, gangbangs, and things like that. There's a whole somewhat sick discourse behind it, and the investigators have followed this reasoning. There's 18 seconds left, so I'm signing off. Thanks. See you in the next episode for the third part, which will be a bit more schematic. Greetings. Ciao ciao.